Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to give you an overview of hypothesis testing, so let's get started. In the next 3 videos actually, we're going to review content that applies to hypothesis testing in particular. We're going to talk about the logic of hypothesis testing, some factors to consider when you are doing hypothesis testing, and then finally some assumptions that we make about hypothesis testing. So here we go. When we're doing hypothesis testing, we're actually applying a lot of what you've already learned so far. We've talked about z-scores for samples and standard error of the mean, the properties of the normal distribution, and probabilities and proportions as they apply to the normal distribution. So you're going to be just using a lot of the concepts that you already know. And these concepts are going to help us to make decisions about statistical results. So hypothesis testing is an inferential procedure. We're going to use data from a sample to draw a general conclusion about a population. So this is a formal approach, and it's a statistical method that uses sample data to evaluate a hypothesis we have about a population. So hypotheses are usually about a population parameter. So we've talked about population parameters. One population parameter, for example, might be the mean. We make a hypothesis about that mean in the population. So a hypothesis is used to predict the characteristics that a sample should have. So we know something about the population, and we're going to predict the characteristics that a sample should have. So when we do hypothesis testing, as a reminder, we're using random sampling, which we've talked about before. We have a known population in random sampling, and every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. And we do what is called sampling with replacement. And this is very important because we can't apply the properties of a normal distribution if we don't do that. The normal distribution has certain proportions, and we need to do sampling with replacement to maintain those proportions. So when we do hypothesis testing, we use sample data. We collect and analyze it, and we compare it to some population parameter, and then we make a decision whether we have support for the hypothesis we made or if we have no support for that hypothesis. And we do this by assigning probability, which we're going to talk more about. So let's just do a learning check first. Generalizing from a sample of n equals 500 to a population of n equals 50,000 to make judgments about a result based on probability would be an example of using what? If you need to pause this video, go ahead and do that. Inferential statistics. We're taking a sample and we're inferring something about the population. When the findings in a research study are believed to be due to an actual phenomenon under investigation and not due to chance or random occurrence, what is this called? Well, we've talked about this a little bit. This is statistical significance. So when we compare our sample mean with the population mean, for example, we have to decide whether or not any differences that we're seeing are just due to error from drawing a quirky sample, or if they are real differences. When there are real differences, we call that statistical significance. So let's talk about the logic underlying hypothesis testing. So we begin with our hypothesis about a population parameter. We use that hypothesis to predict the characteristics that a sample should have. We use random selection of participants, we collect data and we analyze it, and then we compare the sample and the population to decide if the hypothesis has support. So I'm going to give you a completely made-up example, but it kind of makes sense when you think about it. American adults will gain 7 pounds between Thanksgiving and New Year's. And so the population that we're talking about are all American adults. We have a sample, let's say N of 200 American adults, and we take this sample and we weigh them before Thanksgiving and after New Year's. And because we know something about the population, we say the sample should have a mean of about 7 pounds as well. So we compare our sample weight gain to the population, and then we make a decision. Let's take a look at this picture to illustrate. We have 2 normal distributions, and they're separated by some sort of a treatment. And we want to ask, what would happen if everyone got the same treatment in the population? In other words, what if everyone was exposed to the independent variable? So we have on the left a known population before the treatment. We know the mean, we know the standard deviation. And then some treatment is administered. And now on the right-hand side, once everyone receives the treatment, we have sort of now an unknown population. The value for the mean is unknown, and this is the group that is going to be our focus. We're going to be comparing the known population to the unknown population after treatment. And that will help us to answer the question, what would happen if everyone got the same treatment? So this unknown population is our group of focus. So this is completely hypothetical. So we're asking, what if? We can only decide what would happen to a population by using a sample. So in most cases, like I've said, you can't measure the whole population. And so we're using a sample to determine what would happen in the population if everybody received the treatment. So using this sample will tell us something about a population. In other words, we use the sample to infer something about the population that the sample comes from. So in the next video, we're going to talk about factors that influence hypothesis testing.